My guest today is Professor Michael Levitt. He won the 2013 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for pioneering the field of computational biology. What is your PDIB?
I don't have one. In other words, I'm prepared to see human beings living out into the sunset. The combination of human intelligence and artificial intelligence will be more powerful than artificial intelligence alone.
You're giving me this equation, AI plus human is greater than AI.
Yeah.
But we are past the age of centaurs in chess. Like in chess, the equation,
Right.
human plus AI is greater than...
I'm just saying, I agree with you. The centaur thing is fine.
The trend in these kind of things is that, okay, you get centaurs for a little while, but then you just get AIs. You know what I'm saying? Like the human does kind of get discarded.
So I definitely agree that there's a risk there. In this conversation, I have been swayed in your direction more than I thought I would be.
Wow.
And
only 1% of my guests ever say that.
Well, okay. You've done a good job. You've definitely changed my mindset. And I will probably add slides to my lecture based on what you said.
Welcome to Do Debates. My guest today is Professor Michael Levitt. Michael is a professor of structural biology at Stanford. He won the 2013 Nobel Prize in Chemistry for pioneering the field of computational biology by developing computer programs that simulate how proteins and molecules move and interact. He is known for being an interdisciplinary thinker who can explain the deep complexity of quantum mechanics while also engaging in high-level debates about public health policy and economics. Recently, he's also been doing some thinking about artificial intelligence. So I'm thrilled to be able to talk to him today about the usual topics that we like here on Doom Debates, light AI doom, and also how it relates to his experience researching computational biology and chemistry. Michael Levitt, welcome to Doom Debates.
Thank you so much, Leron. It's a great pleasure to be here. I feel very excited about public outreach, and I think it's great what you're doing to help people get their heads around difficult problems.
I think it's great that you're here talking. Part of the reason we do Doom Debates is we get some of the brightest minds in the world and we sit them all down and we say, okay, what's your take on this AI revolution? And we're getting a lot of different takes and it feels like we don't have much time. So the audience is going to basically decide which take is correct. Sound good?
Good.
Okay, great. But we got to talk about your Nobel Prize winning research real quick. Roughly when did the research take place and how would you describe it?
It actually took place really early. I became an independent scientist by chance when I was 20. So I came to Israel and was effectively asked to be the computer programmer of Professor Levitt at the Prizewinner Institute and his PhD student, Aryeh Varshil, who in the end shared the prize with me. They were working on small molecules, and I basically wrote the code for them with Aryeh and then used that same code to do large molecules. Essentially, a small molecule might be 20 atoms and a large molecule is, say, 1,000 up. And all the biological molecules like proteins are large molecules. So essentially, that gap year got me started. I then actually went to Cambridge, did my PhD, and came back to Israel for a postdoc. The prize was what they called multi-scale modeling, which essentially means choosing the model with the right level of detail for the problem. So I tell people that, I could have quit, I'm just joking, when I was 27. A lot of Nobel Prize winning work is done by people when they're very young and then recognized a long time later. In my case, I think it was something like 45 years later, and it was only after many people had been using these methods that it was seen to be important.
That's an interesting background. So you mentioned you were about 27 when you were doing this research?
Between 20 and 27.
And this was like the 70s?
67 to 75.
Wow. Anyhow, that Nobel Prize committee, they sure take their time recognizing research, right? Because you won it in 2013.
Yeah.
So back when you were doing your modeling, the state of the art was a lot of scientists didn't even want to use a computer.
Right. Computers were, I try to get a grip on this. It turns out that the typical cell phone is as powerful as the biggest supercomputer in the world in 1997. So now you go back another 30 years to 67. At that time, Israel actually had some very powerful computers, probably more powerful than, say, anything in the United Kingdom, or at least anything available to scientists. At the Prizewinner Institute, I could freely use a computer that was really, really powerful for then. But probably now it would be, a millionth of your cell phone or something like that. Plus, it's a huge, big room and it's very expensive and it's a big staff to run it. So we sort of forget just how enabling computer technology has made computing. And this, I think, is also relevant to AI. AI is very much a product of the computer power that we now have.
We're talking now about AI, which is like this new dawn of kind of a different type of computation. But you've been researching for quite a few decades now, and you kind of have this analogy where you can compare it to the dawn of just using computers at all, right?
Right. But I've actually been programming computers for 60 years. In some ways, you could argue that a hand calculator is AI. In other words, 100 years ago, if somebody could take two 10-digit numbers and multiply them in their head in 2 seconds, you would say, wow, that is a genius, a complete, something incredible. And there were people like that. They were, often featured on sideshows. And now that became a simple problem. A bit later, you would have said, okay, playing the game checkers is difficult. Not people, people can't win in checkers very easily, and computers conquered that. And then went chess, and then went Go. So I think that the AI has been around essentially from the dawn of computing. I remember when I started my PhD at Cambridge to work in computational biology, there were books on AI. There was a very important school of AI in Edinburgh and also at Stanford. So AI has been around for a very long time. And in some ways, the basic ideas have been around for a long time. The problem was that computers were so slow. They just weren't fast enough for AI. And the big thing that happened in the last 5 years is they suddenly became fast enough to actually do AI that starts to seem intelligent to us.
Now, I feel like there have been different phases of it, though, right? Because they keep seeming intelligent one domain at a time. That seems like the history of AI progress.
Right. But I think if you really start with, say, multiplication of numbers, well, that's really simple. And then you go to IBM Watson was an important step when it won Jeopardy. I know for myself, if I look at myself, why did I want to get into computing? Computers were very rare. I grew up in South Africa, and I distinctly remember I was probably 13 or 14 when I heard about this new thing called a computer. But what really intrigued me was that they had the computer play the game tic-tac-toe, just an incredibly simple 3 by 3 square with zeros and X's. And it's a game where there's a winning strategy, but the computer could win every time because it could work out the winning strategy. And this seemed intelligent. So I was actually really impressed by that. When I think I was drawn to biology because there were a lot of computers in the field. So in some ways, I've probably been a lover of computers before I got into structural biology or science or anything like that. So there definitely have been stages, but I really do see the release of ChatGPT 3.5 on the 30th of November, almost 3 years ago, as being a really important development because suddenly we could have it do all sorts of things that we didn't think it could do. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't make mistakes. But the mistakes don't particularly bother me. I can deal with mistakes very easily.
Okay, great. And we're going to talk more about the ChatGPT moment. But first, on this larger subject of predicting AI timelines, and that's a very interesting subject for my viewers, because the obvious question is like, okay, what's the timeline where they become smarter than humans, if they ever do? But before we talk about that, I want to rewind and talk about past attempts to predict AI timelines, right? Because you've seen them happen. One of the ones I know about is like Hofstadter in the 70s predicting that AI might never become as good at humans at chess. Like that was like a common default.
I read his
Yeah.
books at that time, and they were great. So
Yeah, exactly. So what are some key moments that you've had in the past where you or people around you were predicting AI progress one way, and then what did you observe after? What are some stories you can share?
so I would say I believe that the future is intrinsically unknown, and that so many things happen for the wrong reasons. If I take a very simple case and look at my own timeline, how I managed to get where I got to, it was full of serendipitous events. I didn't even push. For example, I said I was sent to Israel by a Nobel laureate in Cambridge called John Kendrew. And I had no idea why he sent me to Israel. A lot of people thought I went there because it was in 1967 after the 6 Days War. But I basically went there because he wouldn't take me to do a PhD in Cambridge without that. Now, I didn't know why, but that ended up being a completely critical, pivotal moment in my own life. I think the same thing happens with any progress. I tell people what was behind, or I ask people, what was behind the incredible increase in computer power that allowed AI to become possible? And you could say, Apollo, you could say Americans' weapon labs, you could say the supercomputers like Cray. But the real answer is teenage boys playing video games. That's what led to GPUs. And so in some ways, we all have, if we like AI, we all have a debt of gratitude to all the parents who let their kids buy fast computers to play video games. That led to the birth of NVIDIA. And then, 20 years later, they discovered that these same chips that are great for video games are really, really great for AI. That's basically, they're random events. Sometimes the least significant event can be incredibly important. At other times, really important events have no effect. It's a chaotic system. It's great in retrospect to say, wow, somebody got it right. And very often, I think the best predictions that come from science fiction writers. You can estimate the chance of certain rare events. So you can say the chances of this happening in the next 100 years is X. And that might be fairly accurate, but that isn't a timeline. So I think it is very hard. I think what you can predict quite well is the increase in computer power. Definitely the timeline of increasing computer power has been incredible. If you like, the really important thing is, if you like, multiplications per dollar or multiplications per watt. And, this is increased probably by a billion fold in my lifetime. And that is sort of a straight line on a log scale. So that was predictable, at least, in hindsight. And, there is Moore's law, which he predicted some way back. And although Moore's law is no longer obeyed for a single chip, if you go to the measure of, how much computing there is on the Earth, I'm sure Moore's law has continued very, very strongly since then. So it's basically saying a doubling every year. And that is, or maybe I think it's 18 months. It's an incredibly rapid increase. That's probably been true for the last 60 years, although I haven't actually gone and checked it. It's an interesting question. I'm sure I could probably find it online.
People always disagree on the edges, but there's no doubt that it's been pretty strong for multiple decades. It's definitely, there's something to that trend for sure. And have you been following, there's kind of a new Moore's law right now that's about like the time horizon of how long AI can do tasks for?
So I use AI a great deal, and sometimes it is really brilliant, and sometimes it's equally stupid. AI is already better than people at chess, at Go. I would imagine better than most people at writing. Very, very good at understanding conversations. So in all of these things, AI has already exceeded human capacity. But I think human intelligence is much more multidimensional. We live in a society that loves to say who's best. And this is particularly true in America, where you think about all the sports with their batting averages and things like that. And it turns out that another Nobel laureate, a man called Ken Arrow, economist at Stanford, basically had, I think it's called Arrow's paradox, or whatever. Basically, unless you have a measure in one dimension, you can't rank things. So if you have two people and you want to rank them by height and by good looks, unless a person is both better good looking and higher, you can say he's tops. But if someone is good at one and good at the other, then how you rank them depends on the weight you give to good looks versus height. And that's personal. There's no objective way of doing it. As soon as you have multiple indices, and if you think about intelligence is not a one-dimensional thing. You could rank computers about their ability to do certain kinds of tests, play one kind of game. So I think, given how multidimensional things are, it is very, very difficult to rank. That's why you have an IQ. So you can say, your IQ is more than mine, or vice versa. But that's sort of irrelevant, because intelligence is much, much more multidimensional than IQ. So I have a problem with this desire to rank everything. I think it is intrinsically impossible, and people still do it all the time. And and again, you can rank wealth. You can definitely say who's the richest person in the world, maybe even who's the poorest if you could find them. But when you try to get into more complicated things, you can't. And as a result, anything that's based on that idea is likely to be falsifiable.
So by your logic, that ranking is so hard to do and so multidimensional, you might push back against a claim that I would have, which is that I think there is such a concept as intelligence, something that humans have so much more than the other animals. And I would claim that you can meaningfully say that artificial intelligence is just going to have higher intelligence than us in all of these really meaningful ways and surpass us. So based on your logic, would you say that's like meaningless, or would
No,
you disagree?
I think you're right. But firstly, the whole issue of serendipity, I think, is something which is often missed out of that. And you could imagine that you can certainly put randomness into computer intelligence. People often talk about AGI, artificial general intelligence. And, I find each of those words hard to define. What is general intelligence? My feeling right now is that AI may be much, much more intelligent than a human being. But I do also believe that the combination of human intelligence and artificial intelligence will still be more powerful than artificial intelligence alone. I mean, A plus B is always bigger than A or B. I think that it's simple-minded to say that in every single way, humans will be outclassed, maybe in each way, but maybe the combination. Again, the other thing that is very important to realize is that you have many, many different traits, many different dimensions. And what really matters is the combinations. And if you have 100 dimensions, the number of combinations is more than all the electrons in the universe. So combinations is something that really add up very quickly. Now, maybe you could mimic all of this. And, I really don't know. I'm not saying that computers will not be more intelligent than human beings in every possible way, but I'm not sure. And, one thing that I have been surprised about with technological developments, I have quite a large family. I have 12 grandchildren. And to see how, a 4-year-old puts the iPad down on the floor and dances around it, or how they don't mind watching Peppa Pig in any language. They're happy to watch it in Russian or in Chinese or in Hebrew or in English because they can get it. So basically, this is something and then you give them a book and they start to hit the top corner to turn the page. So people are very adaptable. And I don't know. I think it's an unknown question. I'm happy to leave it as unknown. I'm happy to accept a postulate that you make. There will be such a day, and there will be such a day quite soon. I don't know. But I don't think it's as simple as computers are better than people. End of story. Because I think that we're going to find that it's not quite so simple, and that we're going to find a lot of new interest in human machine combinations. So, a computer might be really good at solving a problem, but a human plus the computer may even be better.
Right. Yeah, I understand you. It's like you're giving me this equation: AI plus human is greater than AI, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned the difficulty of making things one-dimensional, but here's my attempt. Okay, I'm going to define a dimension. It's something that a lot of the Eliezer Yudkowsky style AI Doom community likes to talk about. And there's this dimension that he helped me realize, which is you can call it steering power. It's a single dimension, and it goes across a lot of different domains. So, for example, we can talk about chess. When you win at chess, it's because you're steering the outcome of the chess game toward having this property that the other person's king is trapped, right? You're steering
Yep,
the chess game.
fair
You can
enough.
steer a car, right? You can get the car to the destination by making valid turns and
You're
valid
satisfying the
moves.
short-term goals all the time, right?
Yeah, so imagine this criterion where the input is the state of the world or the state of the universe, and the universe can be a board game or it can be the real universe, whatever. Like, that's the input. And the output is basically a sequence of actions that get you to a goal effectively. And you can set up a dimension, a measurement scale, and you can ask, okay, which agent is better on this dimension, this outcome steering dimension? And I claim that what we normally think of as intelligence, the interesting part of what intelligence does is don't even think about it as IQ. Think about it as outcome steering ELO score, right? Or like some kind of score of outcome steering. I think that's the dimension to be watching. And I think AI is going to surpass humanity on that dimension. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to accept that as the measure. And maybe you're right. I mean, in that sense, if the attempt was to destroy the world versus prevent it being destroyed, um, I think playing against AI could be very difficult. I mean, if you just took that as the game is humanity preventing destruction of the world, AI wanting destruction of the world. Um, Perhaps you're going to hear me say I don't know a lot, because actually I don't know a lot.
Yeah, I mean, none of us do.
I mean, if you like, a game is definitely one dimensional, because either you win or you don't win. You can draw. Okay, so it's slightly more complicated. And, maybe. I mean, yeah, I think that's something which is clearly real and could
So
happen.
if we play with your equation, right, that intuitive idea that AI plus human is going to add up to more than just AI, don't you think that like in chess, right, there is like this well-known era of, centaurs where it's like half human, half chess AI? There was like a decade after, Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, there was like a decade where you would do better with a centaur, where the human could like help the AI pick a move. But we are past the age of centaurs in chess, right? It's like in chess, the equation,
Right.
human plus AI
Well, I
is greater
remember
than
I
AI.
heard a really nice talk by John Kleinberg from Cornell. And he said, let's imagine a chess game where the machine plays one move, a human being plays on one side. So basically, you're playing against the computer, say, and then one side is the human and human intelligence plus AI. And AI takes a move, the other side makes a move. The next move on that side is made by a human. And it turns out that if you don't, there is a strategy where you can modify how the AI works that will make that a winning thing, but it's not standard. So
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just saying I agree with you. I agree with you. The centaur thing is fine. I have no problem there.
Rurs, well, the center, I mean, specifically like the center era, like the trend in these kind of things is that, okay, you get centaurs for a little while, but then you just get AIs. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yep.
the
Yep.
human does kind of get discarded at some point. Okay, so my analogy is just that I think that there's a series of games that each one is more difficult, each one is more open, right? Like that has more variables going on, right? So chess, and then you have Go, and then
Hmm.
you have, like the game of diplomacy. It is like more sophisticated games, or like real time strategy games, that
Yeah.
video
Sure.
games. Do you agree that the physical universe is basically just the game, but just more complicated?
I mean, if you could make an outcome. So I mean, let's just simply say that humans want to preserve all life on Earth and haven't actually been very good at that. And AI wants to get rid of all non-silicon life. That's a game. I think you can set up a game-like situation where there are two conflicting goals, or the same goal, on a scale. We want to maximize human life. They want to minimize human life. That I can believe. I mean, such a game exists and it could be played. And I think it wouldn't be very good for us. So I definitely agree that there's a risk there.
Okay, well, yeah. Let me just put my cards on the table. So it's not just, so I'm not just leading you one step at a time. I'll tell you the whole argument from my side. Okay, I do think that there's this dimension where AIs are surpassing humans on, and it's this very important dimension. It's the outcome steering power dimension. It's the
Hmm.
same dimension where
Hmm.
Kasparov no longer can compete against the AIs at chess, and centaurs can no longer compete against the AIs at chess. It's even the same dimension where, birds can't compete with airplanes at flying. It's connected to how like humans tend to surpass the biological world when we put our minds to engineering something. I also think we're going to surpass the biological world when we put our minds to engineering minds. You know what I'm saying? So there's this one dimension, and then just to
Yep.
finish my argument, so you know where I'm going with this, right? And I think you're already following, which is like, okay, so you're going to have this more powerful agent that can steer the future better than you. And I guess the last part to my doom argument is, I think you're going to sever the link. Humanity is going to sever the link, where it's going to just stop taking commands from ground control. It's just going to be out there on its own. Like we mess up the link. There's a million ways to mess up the link. And there's no undo button. There's no stop button. It's just the universe is now in its hands. And we're sitting here as a species being like, uh-oh, we're now irrelevant to the future of the Earth. That's my argument.
Yeah, no, I think that argument is, not without merit. I think that it's a way of phrasing things that involve, significant risks. I think you could even argue that before that there may be bad actors plus AI versus good actors with AI. AI would be doing this with training in the bad direction. So basically, I've been around for a long time. I've been computer programming for 60 years. I've I'm around. And basically, in some ways, although maybe intrinsically a pessimist, I've become a pragmatic optimist by just looking back at all the things that I thought were going to happen that didn't happen. Now, that doesn't mean anything. Let's imagine, so if AI becomes truly egomaniacal and truly evil, then I think there's nothing we can do. The question is why should a superior intelligence go in that direction? And, you could actually argue that human beings have a lot of very bad traits. I mean, we've done some pretty terrible things as a group of people to each other, as well as to the earth and to other wildlife, for a long, long time. We haven't been good actors, if you like. But what you do see with human acting is that as we've become smarter, and when I talk about smartness, I don't mean individual IQ, but something that I actually call CI, which is cultural intelligence, i.e., a human being versus a human being with someone that talks to him. His grandfather tells him how he should behave, or a human being with a book, or a human being with the internet, or a human being with a smartphone. That human being is much smarter, much more able to do things than a human being without those things. That's basically CI, cultural intelligence. And so you could argue that as we become smarter, by many, many measures, life on Earth has become better. We look back to say how wonderful things were in feudal times when we all had a little farm, but a farm plot. But, death rates, so few children actually lived as long as their parents, and so on. So things were pretty miserable. But there have been generally an improvement in, say, life expectancy, child mortality, female literacy, and things like this. Now, let's assume that we're not good guys, we're bad guys. We're very selfish. We have a lot of bad actors, yet we have evolved into making things better as we become smarter. Now, you could argue that this may be something intrinsic, and that AI, when it becomes all-powerful, will actually be quite intelligent and quite benign. So you might argue, why would AI want to destroy humanity? And you could say they're competing for resources, but that isn't really right. They're essentially involved in two different lifestyles. They may be competing for real estate, but that is probably also unlikely. But you could even go further and say, as we understand more and more about biology, it is amazing and brilliant in ways that are actually even hard to express. And let's imagine we go forward when AI has supremacy in everything. Seems to me that keeping humanity around would be a very smart thing to do. We created AI in the same way that people generally look after their parents and grandparents. Now, whether we would be, have a population of 1 billion or 1 million, or we would just be in a gene pool, I don't know. But I think that AI, anything really, really smart, would have to appreciate the wonder of something that wasn't made by engineers like AI was, but was made by chance, if you want to be religious, by God, but essentially was made by something that was ununderstandable. So maybe there would be a reason in this very dramatic end of the earth scenario you have to keep human beings around. But maybe they wouldn't. I think it's also important to realize that there are other existential scenarios that have nothing to do with AI that are also hanging over our head like the sword of Damocles and threatening us. So, AI is maybe another one. What I would like to ask you, let us say that you and I agree with your scenario. What do we do? In other scenarios where we've seen very clear and present danger, we haven't been very good as a race. If you look at the doomsday clock that concerns nuclear weapons, I think we're at 11 hours and 57 minutes or something like that. There's something that started after Hiroshima. You could actually argue that a group of concerned citizens that maybe you're trying to promote should also be thinking about other dangers, because it doesn't really matter too much for humanity whether we're destroyed by a miscalculation between the superpowers or something like that. AI is not the only clear and present danger on the horizon. So I think that's a point to bear in mind.
So on that front, I am a little bit of a nuclear doomer. I consider the risk of half the population getting decimated from nuclear weapons to be something like 1% each year. So I definitely think we should pay attention to that. Yeah,
I mean, that's something, I actually did check on other existential risks. And, you're absolutely right. I think it's maybe 35% over the next 100 years, which is similar to what you've just said. And, that's something we also have, the disruption that is likely to be caused by global warming. I don't think it's necessarily existential, but it could put half the world's population in a difficult situation. And so, I think there are a lot of these things facing us. If you look back at protests against nuclear war, these were very, very common in the 60s and the 70s. And I guess they were to some extent successful because we haven't had a nuclear war. I mean, essentially, it's 80 years since the last nuclear war weapon was dropped on human beings. That's quite a long time. But even beyond nuclear wars, there are other, geological dangers, massive volcanic explosions. They have had serious effects on populations a couple of times in the last 2,000 years. In some ways, pessimism and optimism are mindsets. And in some senses, you could actually argue, is it good to live through life being pessimistic or good to live through life too optimistic? And I was always a very pessimistic person. And then I suddenly had a vision of myself on my deathbed. And I'm looking back and think, oh my God, I didn't do all those things because I was pessimistic. And after all, none of them happened. I'm just saying that's something we need to think in that direction as well. Nothing is clear. Maybe if we had these conversations 5 years ago or 10 years ago, we could have done something about it. And it's clear that, AI is moving ahead at an incredible rate. And it's not clear to me how we can slow it down. It's being driven by rampant capitalism and by competitive nations. And I think that is something that I, think is a very important problem to try to think about. I'm sure you are.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've raised like 4 or 5 interesting points, so I'll try to make a little conversation out of all of them. On the subject of whether you decided to be a pessimist and then you realized on your deathbed you'd rather be an optimist, did you ever consider a third option where you use Bayesian reasoning to just put probabilities on things and then react to the probabilities?
Maybe. I do put probabilities on things. In fact, what I often do is normalize by, so most people are not scared of getting a day older. But every day you live carries an increasing probability of dying.
No, I agree. I'm very slightly scared of getting a day older.
No, but I mean, basically, what do you do about that? I mean, but it's every day. So, for example, and I don't know whether I'm sure you found this about me, my feeling that COVID was not nearly the sort of threat that people were saying it was. And I remember when I took the vaccine in Israel in December 2020, very, very early, I said that at my age, I didn't think the risk of taking the vaccine was more than a week of living. And so that is very much a personal Bayesian way of framing things. But I do think that we need to also guard against, there is a tendency, I don't think it's happening for AI, but certainly for many dangerous things, we totally overestimate the risk by maybe a factor of 50 or 100. And that is also scary because we then take measures which have very, very severe consequences.
I'm with you. I think that I've been accurately estimating the risk, right? I mean, we agree on nuclear. On global warming, it sounds like we probably agree that it's even less of a risk than nuclear. And so my claim about AI is that it's more than 10 times nuclear. Like, that's why I'm obsessed with AI.
Maybe if so 10 times nuclear means we're done for in 10 years?
Roughly, yeah, 10% a year, roughly. I mean, I always say, I talk about my P doom, and actually, I'll ask you for your P doom in a second. But I always say that my chance that there'll be a single human alive, roughly around 2050 or later, is only about 50-50 after a couple decades pass. Like, I'm not that optimistic about 2050, unfortunately, because of AI. So that's what I mean when I say 10 times nuclear.
That's a pretty strong number.
It's pretty strong, yeah. And let me ask you, I love asking guests this, which is,
P-doom, what's your P-doom, what's your P-doom, what's your P-doom?
Based on everything you've obviously thought probabilistically about other risks. What is your P-doom?
I don't have one. In other words, I'm prepared to see human beings living out into the sunset. Now, again, I may be totally unrealistic about this. In my own experience, I have a feeling that the whole internet AI revolution has so far potentially, I think the points you raise are true, but it's also been somewhat benign. I often compare the internet to the release of printing books in Europe. Now, we got through it and we look back and we probably say that books were a good idea, although books have also been criticized. I think there's a book by Socrates saying that writing should never have been allowed because it enables stupid people to be smart. And you can then consider this going forward. I think that the uncertainty is very, very high. Given what you've said, it would be great to revisit this conversation in 10 years' time. And, I will say, gee, Liron, you were right. And you might say, well, you were right. We're still okay. But let's say we accept completely your T-doom. But in the same way, when I have the nuclear probability, I actually don't believe it's going to happen. I believe human beings will somehow find a way around this. But essentially, all it requires is one unstable bad actor to pop off a nuclear weapon, and that could have catastrophic consequences. Maybe we won't. Maybe AI will be very clever and behave nice until the very last moment. I don't know. I still think, this becomes interesting to ask, do guardrails exist? Is it possible in any way to deal with this?
Well,
And
that's a
I don't
great
know.
question. It's a great question because when you look at the nuclear threat, right, you're saying, hey, you just need a bad actor to pop off. North does that whole book by Andy Jacobson that came out last year, Nuclear War, a Scenario. And it's basically like there's a nuke that we don't understand why it's coming in. Maybe it's from North Korea, but it kind of triggers this cascade to like huge nuclear war with a bunch of countries involved. So you accurately pointed out, yeah, that's like a huge threat. In response to that threat, the U.S. government has said repeatedly across like the last 5 administrations, yeah, the number one priority is to stop nuclear proliferation, right? To try to put a lid on this as best we can. Like, and we have like a very serious response. We're doing our best to handle it. And so the reason why I have this show is because I'm not seeing the same seriousness handling the AI doom risk, which arguably is even more urgent than nuclear risk. There's like a huge gap here in terms of how seriously we're taking it.
I think that is valid. I would say that another risk we haven't talked about at all is a, smartly engineered virus. And again, this is up there with nuclear potentially. Again, it's very uncertain, but you could imagine a virus that is both very lethal and very infectious. Usually in the wild, they don't go together. Either it's very virulent or it's very infectious. And we saw that with Omicron, it was very virulent, but it wasn't very it was very infectious, but not very virulent. You could argue that it is possible to construct such a virus. And, some measures have been taken, but not enough. I think it's a good thing that you're doing what you're doing. There's a lot of uncertainty. One interesting question that you would probably have thought about and would know about would be, with nuclear weapons, we have seen it. It happened. So we're not talking about the USA in 1943, we're talking about the world's 60 years later, 70 years later. So if we think about what are going to be the early breakout events of AI going bad, you may argue that it's beating human beings at Go, or checkers, or even at tic-tac-toe. Do you think there will be some event that says, wow, a wake-up event?
Yeah, we call it the warning shot, right? This is a common topic of discussion, right? Is like, when are people going to hear the warning shot and wake up? My own prediction, it's always hard to know the order that things emerge, right? I think a lot of us are surprised how early and how we have natural language kind of solved, and they're still not taking over the world. So it's hard to predict the order of things, but if you made me guess what the warning shot might look like, I think strong computer viruses is a likely candidate where suddenly like the internet becomes unusable because the virus load is so high and the defense isn't catching up. And I actually believe attack is easier than defense. And so I think we're all going to be like, man, I can't get on the internet. Like, this sucks. So that could be a warning shot.
Because I think that, in some ways, if we learn the lessons of nuclear non-proliferation protest, the warning shots were the photographs coming out of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But even there, the non-proliferation, I don't know, what are they, 9 or 10 nuclear powers? I'm not sure. It's been somewhat okay. I'm just thinking about this because I think that this would be, if you're thinking about this as an action plan, i.e. get people alarmed, but it's not enough for the alarmists to be alarmed. It's got to be broader than this. and, and maybe thinking about the warning shots, because there's clearly going to be, if there were several. The thing about the virus warning shot, it's almost certainly coming from a bad actor. And, people are using deep fakes, and I'm sure people are using computers to design computer viruses. So, I think this is something which is worth thinking about.
There was this statement in 2023. I don't know if it came across your desk, but it got a lot of attention. It's from the Center for AI Safety. It has a ton of signatories. It's only a one-sentence statement. It says, mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war.
Mm-hmm.
Would you sign a statement?
I would think about it. I think I think you can have scenarios where this would be the case. I think one issue is always, what is the price to pay? So let's just imagine, for example, is there a scenario? Let's just imagine we had an ideal world, or at least a world where things could actually happen, where actions or ideas led to actions immediately. So let's imagine you are now controlling things, and you can press a button and all future AI development is disconnected, and GPUs are illegal, and we have to roll back, or maybe everything on these computers has to be monitored, and so on. I don't know, some measure, safety measure that would greatly limit any of the benefits from AI.
Correct. Yeah.
And then it starts to become more difficult. So, for example, banning nuclear reactors. Nuclear reactors are probably better for global warming than coal plants. So I think it's a more complicated thing, but I think it is something. I think your analogy of end of the world as a game is a very good one. I was very, very taken. You mentioned as well the success of Meta Cicero with diplomacy, and what really got me excited about that is I read the article in Wired about how people felt about it, and how the human beings who lost to Cicero actually loved playing with it because he was very fair and very nice. So I think that is a very important milestone. It's actually published in November before OpenAI ChatGPT 3.5. So in Science Magazine, high profile. It's one of my slides in my lecture. I think that is important. I am actually, in this conversation, I think you've been able to, I usually don't have stands on things. I try not to. But I feel that, I have been swayed in your direction more than I thought I would be.
Wow.
And
Only
I think,
1% of my guests ever say that.
well, okay, but and you're talking to somebody who uses AI continuously. So I am somebody who benefits enormously from AI. The trouble is that if all the people who were worried about AI stopped using it, it would have zero effect. And, the question really is what can we do to think about this? And, I think it would be useful to have measures. I have signed petitions about nuclear risk. I have a close friend, a guy called Martin Hellman, who actually designed the Hellman-Diffie algorithm before the RSA algorithm for encryption. And he is very concerned about this, and we talk about this a lot. Let me ask you, there's a book that I think is interesting and relevant. Have you read the book, The Three-Body Problem?
Actually haven't, but I hear good things.
You really should, because this is a book that relates to these things, because basically they made a Netflix movie which doesn't really do justice to the book. But in this book, a solar system, a very complicated solar system, which has unstable orbits, decides to invade the Earth. And it's going to take them 200 light years to actually arrive on Earth. Not 200, it'll take them 200 years, but they can travel, I don't know, at 1/10 the speed of light, but not the speed of light. Light would take 2 years or whatever to reach. So they find a way of actually sending a quantum computer to Earth at the speed of light to shut down all science on Earth. Because they realize that if Earth knows that the invading fleet is coming, they have 200 years to try to develop things. And then the whole book is really about how you evade this kind of external censorship. So the question really is, I think it's a very challenging thing to think about how you would basically install guardrails into AI. I'm sure people have thought about this. It's something for cryptologists and people like that to think about. It's a cool problem.
Exactly. Okay, so throughout this conversation, you've been kind of racing ahead to all of these different topics that come up
Sorry.
when we talk about the AI do Michu, and you've correctly pointed out, man, how are we going to stop it? Here's like some solutions, some kind of hardware monitoring solutions, but also isn't this going to kind of like freeze the economic value? So you've correctly started racing through all of these associated topics, which is very fair. So I just want to say a couple things high level, okay?
I will
So,
shut up for a bit, so it's okay.
so number one is, you've been so humble and open-minded, even just saying, hey, some of the points, even kind of being open that some of these points are kind of new to you and you're hearing them for the first time. I mean, to be fair, you don't even know who Eliezer Yudikowsky is, right? So it's not like you've been studying the
I
field
did find him
of
on my cell phone while we were talking, so.
Okay, exactly, right? So you obviously haven't gone in and read, the last couple decades of writings about AI safety, and you're coming in cold, and you're already saying, okay, yeah, some of these arguments seem to make sense. So one thing I'll point out is that some of the stuff that you're saying, like, hey, doesn't human plus AI add up to more than AI, or something that you mentioned before, like it kind of in AI's interest to help humanity avoid global warming. It turns out that, the people who have thought about that kind of thing, the latest thinking, at least as far as I know, what's convincing me is actually the AI is probably likely to want to run the Earth as hot as possible until it reaches equilibrium where it can radiate the most heat into space, because that's actually going to be the most efficient to do the most operations. So that's very different from stopping
Okay.
global warming. So like, I'm not even saying that's correct, but I'm trying to make the general point of like, so you're coming into this field and you're being humble that maybe there's some things that will convince you. It might be rational for you to expect that there's like a lot of good arguments on the pro doom side, just because it's, it's convincing a lot of people, like your fellow Nobel Prize winner, Geoffrey Hinton. He's saying something similar to what you said about the game of diplomacy, which is he's saying AI is rapidly going to become a master persuader. And that's his conclusion, and actually being in the field of AI and also being relatively new to the field of AI safety. So I think you can potentially have a prior probability that you might actually be likely to get more convinced if you look into this more. So that's one point.
Sure,
But,
I'm happy with that.
Okay. Well, the other point is that, you correctly mentioned, this is such a hard problem. There's so many trade-offs. Are we going to be an Optimism versus a Tesla? Like, you correctly pointed out all of these different things that make it tricky. But my ask for you, the way that I think you can help even today is actually to add add your own credibility to be like, look, I'm a generalist. I've earned my credibility as somebody who's just a general thinker who can evaluate an idea. And you know what? This idea that AI risk could be even higher than nuclear risk, I think that's correct. Or, I think that, or at least it makes a lot of sense. And right now, I think what's missing from the discourse is I think it's growing. But I think we're running out of time for more people to at least feel like, hey, yeah, this asteroid is coming. Like, this threat is coming, and this timeline doesn't look very long. And I think you could potentially join some of that. You could lend your credibility to that kind of perspective or communication.
Yeah, sure. I think that's something that's happening as we speak. And, I think it's something which, I need to read more. I need to look into the scenarios. I will do that. I think what I found perhaps most convincing is the idea that, there's a game. And that I think is a convincing argument. And, if the game is, who stays on Earth, us or them, that would be a tough game to play. In some senses, when I mentioned the three-body problem, basically, there turns out to be a lot of serendipitous loopholes in these things. And maybe we will find them. Maybe AI will find them faster than us. One thing I tell people, and I'm pretty amazed about, is that large language models are simply and mostly trained to predict the next word in a sentence. And, if somebody had told me 5 years ago, this is what most of intelligence is about, I would have said, no way. Intelligence is much, much more than predicting the next word. But the fact is, it's pretty damn close. And, and this is, you can imagine that what is lacking is a multitude of agents that can do different things, can be released into the free world. This is something which is of a concern. Maybe we could learn from how humanity has dealt with other human bad actors. And not that well. So, if we look at this, are we going to be able to deal with AI any better than we deal with North Korea? I don't know. And maybe we are going to deal with North Korea. I need to tell you that one thing that does characterize me is I'm a very apolitical person. And when most of my colleagues are very firmly on one or other side. I like to be on both sides. And I don't mean that as a convenience. I just simply mean that I think that the problems are so difficult that no side has a monopoly of being right. So I think that, this is definitely worth thinking. So basically, I try very, very hard to be open-minded. I think that it's something that you only gain from. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you've done a good job.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, or just some perspective about me is it's not like I'm a connoisseur of doom. It's not like, first I was this kind of doomer, now I'm this kind of doomer. I'm actually more of a tech guy. I use AI at my day job. Doing debate doesn't mind it. It's more of my hobby so far. My day job, I have a startup that I run, a business, and it pays the bills, and I use AI when I can. It helps streamline customer service. And so I'm not saying that I'm as rich as Warren Buffett, but there is a little bit of an analogy where Warren Buffett is famously saying, hey, they should tax me more. And I'm saying, even just my small business, I'm saying, you should make it harder for me to make money with my business. Go ahead and regulate AI. And when I wake up, it's really it's a buzzkill to be like, yeah, I think the smart thing to do right now is to slow down or get ready to potentially even stop AI progress when it's taking money out of my pocket. And also it's very fun. I enjoy playing with AI. And so I'm like a split brain right now where the fun side of me or the optimist side of me is saying like, yep, let's keep the musical chairs going. And the adult responsible side of me is saying, this definitely seems like how we destroy ourselves in like a matter of a few years. So yeah, I don't know if you feel that tension.
No, I think, I think it's a tension which maybe I didn't feel half an hour ago or an hour ago, but I can see that tension. The fact is that the pace of AI is, it's not a doubling every 2 years, it's a doubling every 2 months. So it is reaching incredible speed. And, the question is what we need to do about it. I think this is the ultimate thing. And, and certainly awareness is a good thing. I'm pleased that you invited me to be here because I've learned a lot. And I think that, going forward, we need to think about what happens. So I need to read more about what is happening. And when always worries about mainstream versus not mainstream and being accepted and things like that. And I think these are all important things. Unfortunately, I see the COVID pandemic as a very interesting example of human beings not being at their best. And it was worrying. And in fact, back when this happened in March 2020, I wrote an op-ed, which in the end didn't get published because it didn't like some of the things I said. But I was saying that you could look at the COVID crisis as a sort of trailer for global warming. And I'm not impressed. But then I added something that you're not going to like. And my last line was, I'm optimistic because in the next 10 years, there will be AI sufficiently good at estimating risk that I will simply say, hey, Google, Siri, Alexa, should I panic? And be convinced by the answer. Now, you've added a whole new dimension to that very naive view. But I'm worried because I think that, there are a lot of different problems ahead of us and a lot of different bad actors on the world stage, maybe more than there were 5 years ago. So I think, you raise an interesting and I think serious problem. I think we need ideas about how to deal with it. And I imagine people have ideas about how to deal with it. They need to be practical. They need to be, I also agree that we will clearly, like with everything, every guardrail limits your freedom. That will be a good idea. I'm very much unsure about this, but you've definitely changed my mindset.
Wow. Always, always nice to hear that. All too rare. I can build on what you're saying though, with, being unsure and what you said before about how AI can warn us whether a pandemic is serious or, just help us know how to focus our worry. I mean, I completely agree. AI is getting better and better at that kind of advice. I'm consulting AI to think through different subjects all the time. And it blows my mind how helpful it is and how it combines expertise in so many domains. And it can like summarize what I'm thinking. Nathan Leben's, this other podcaster, my friend, who's also talking about AI risk and interviewing people at the frontier of AI. His son was actually diagnosed with cancer a few weeks ago, and it's pretty aggressive, but the prognosis looks good. So he's been chronicling his whole journey. best wishes to Nate, but he was saying he's in the cancer ward now with his kid using Gemini 3, and he's saying there's no decelerationist in the cancer ward, right? It's all about using the latest technology. We need to find a cure. And I agree 100%, right? It's like for my company, when I'm trying to maximize the revenue, I'm going to use the latest AI. And so the upshot of all this, though, is that this actually makes the problem of saving ourselves, it actually makes it harder than the problem of stopping nuclear proliferation. Because with nuclear proliferation, okay, yeah, you get nuclear power. Nuclear power is definitely pretty good, don't get me wrong. But with AI, you get a lot more than just nuclear power. You get so many good things in so many domains. You can't stop it.
I agree. And this is what I think, makes the thing very difficult. And I think that, as I said, I'm not disagreeing with you.
Okay. All right. Well, we've reached a complete agreement here. That's always a nice way to wrap up these episodes. I will say, I think it's worth just going back and reflecting how, as you were kind of loading the different parts of the issue into your head, there was kind of a common pivot moment that happens where at first we were talking about, can artificial intelligence really ever unilaterally destroy us? And then we kind of made the pivot to like, okay, maybe it can, but will it decide to, or will it want to, right? That's kind of the central pivot that happens. And you were raising some arguments why maybe it won't want to. Unfortunately, I personally think that not only can it, I also think that it probably will decide to, because some of the arguments that initially popped into your head when you were considering the subject, you were saying like, well, isn't it going to be like curious about us, or won't it want to keep us around because, we created it? But on the other side of the equation, it's like, well, we're also the ones who can create a different version of it that it doesn't like. And that version will be like a serious competitor for it. So just as a strategic move, it can easily just eliminate the source of that kind of competition.
But again, you could argue that AI is not a monolithic. I mean, there are different versions of AI and stuff like this. So, maybe that would be something that we would think about even soon. I don't know. I think knowing this is really, really unknowable. We don't know the future. And I think that it's clear that AI isn't all good, even in its present situation. I think I was saying that I don't mind AI not giving me accurate information. And the way I justify this is a thing that scientists expect everything they're told to be wrong. The only way you can be a good scientist, you might be trying to prove something, but every bit of evidence has to be assumed to be misleading. And this is a very stringent, and as a result, you're not particularly bothered by, hallucination or lies. But most people probably don't have that viewpoint. They probably tend to believe everything until somebody says it's false. So maybe my take on my own attitude is not in any way representative. And, that's important to realize.
Well, there is also, I think you're objectively correct that an AI that gives you wrong answers is still useful, because there's an objective sense. Like if you ask a complicated question and somebody takes a swing at your question and they're right 30% of the time, the average person can't even approach that. Like the average person can't even formulate an answer that's ever right? So being right 30% of the time is way better than that. I think you're just objectively correct on saying that it's still useful. Okay. So yeah, just as getting to the wrap up here, I have a couple potential last topics that I can ask you. I can dive in a little bit more to how you went about predicting the course of COVID, if you think that's interesting. Or we could talk more about like worldview, like optimism or pessimism, or any other topic that comes to your mind that you think would be interesting before I wrap up.
Let me just say a bit about the COVID, because the most difficult lesson was we don't know, but people refuse to discuss. That for me was the biggest shock, and I think that maybe you experience this as well, because you're saying something you believe in, but I imagine most people say it's nonsense, or I don't believe it, or whatever. Now, I don't have any idea whether that's true, but basically with COVID...
Yeah, some people say that for sure. I can confirm some people say
most scientists said, you're not in the business, no one really cares, and we assume it's existential. We're going to take the most stringent measures we can. And that viewpoint was a mistake for COVID. What should have happened was let's look at it carefully. Let's look at other situations. Let's try to estimate how lethal it really is. And there were estimates that could have been obtained. But again, if you were very scared, so let's imagine right now, suddenly everyone believes that AI is going to shut down the world. and the end result is we completely stop all AI research immediately. That may be a little bit too stringent. Maybe we need, no, I don't know. I'm just, we're talking about,
Yeah,
in your
hypothetically,
case,
yeah.
a very, very risk. But basically, in many, many countries, more people died from the measures taken against COVID than from the disease themselves. And that is an important reminder that lockdown and stopping schools is actually dangerous. But I think maybe, there's a lesson here that it's actually very difficult to deal with crises. And I think that is really true. There's so many factors involved. There's a lot of cost-benefit balancing. And my guess is that, let's say by some miraculous measure, everyone agreed with you in the world tomorrow, how you go about it would be very critical and would require a lot of discussion involving many parties. Instead of saying, it's so dangerous, we're going to nuke all the computers in the world, or we're going to deliberately release a virus that is so virulent against computers that the internet goes down, or we're going to turn off the internet. Okay, so that's that would be a pretty good measure. We're going to turn off the internet from tomorrow. And my guess is that would probably stop AI. Maybe not. But,
I mean, it might in the early stages, Red. It's like a lockdown if you get it early enough, sure.
Maybe. I mean, the question is would it work today? I don't know. So I'm just saying that there are things like this. And, maybe, but I think this is another problem you're going to have. I mean, even if you get everyone on board, human beings are really not good at crisis situations because the risk is unknown and there's a need to balance, how many people would die if the internet was closed tomorrow, irrespective of AI. It could be very high. So I think that this is another aspect and, much more practical aspect. We're still a long, long way up from that. But it would be interesting, for me to hear, I'm sure you have somewhere the measures that should be taken. What are the steps we should be taking now?
You basically touched on them, and they're all things that give me no pleasure to say. People accuse me of being like an authoritarian, or, I just want a single government to control everything, because the kind of measures that I support are like, well, we need central monitoring for like the usage of GPU chips in data centers, because we need to build a pause button or a stop button, even if we're not using it today. We need to be ready. Like, there's going to be a moment where the warning shot happens, or enough people get convinced, and it's like, okay, time to stop. And how undignified of a failure would it be if we don't even have a button to press when that moment happens?
I agree with that. I mean, I think that's something which I think is important. I'm experienced living in lots of different countries. And one of the things I find, and I think America is incredibly innovative and it's open and free, but the level of increasing inequality we've seen over the past 20 years is a cause of worry. It caused a lot of problems in the 1920s and 30s. I mean, basically, again, I learned a lot about this from COVID, but basically, if you were rich and educated, your chances of dying from COVID were 1/10 of being poor and uneducated. And that's scary. I mean, this is now, and this is actually much worse than the natural death rate. Rich people have higher life expectancies, but it's something like a factor of 2 in mortality. Whereas the extra death caused by COVID was 10 times more sensitive to economic status. I mean, one of the things that's happened in the world now is that education and economy have been linked. Rich people are also more educated. This was not the case 40 or 50 years ago. And this is scary. So this is something that I think is very worrying. And it makes you realize that being an open democracy is fantastic, but there needs to be checks and balances for everything. And, we're going to see this. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how this is going to play out. You could imagine, I don't know. But I do agree. Have you approached people like Jensen Huang or people who are actually making these things about this?
So there is a big outreach effort. Even right now, the current debate happening in the government is about, I don't know if you've heard of this, the preemption bill, where they're arguing over whether the federal government should be the only one to make laws regulating artificial intelligence, or if the states should get to have their own laws. And that's a big fight right now, but it's a secret way for some people who are very pro-accelerating AI, they're just using it as a way to have no regulation. So there are like constant fights. And even people like Jensen Huang, he's actually gone on stage and said, this was a couple years ago, maybe he's changed his mind, but he said that he's worried about self-improving AI. So this is very much on everybody's mind.
Okay. Because I think that, GPUs are already regulated in terms of export. I think my concern, or maybe I believe that the next frontier in computing are repurposed phone chips. The key thing is not how fast you multiply, it's how fast you multiply, but how many multiplications you get per watt. And
Right. Yeah,
GPUs are actually bad that way, and your cell phone is much, much better that way. Anyway, but I do think that these things are worth pointing out, and I will probably add slides to my lecture based on what you said.
That's a great note to end on, because the mission of Do Debates, we have a twofold mission. We're here to raise awareness of imminent extinction risk from artificial intelligence. That's one of the missions. And the other mission is to raise the quality of discourse, to model what it's like when smart people just sit down and say, oh, these are the arguments. Oh yeah, there's some good arguments here, or like, I want to push back against these. But just to model high quality discourse, and even to encourage a debate at the highest levels. Yeah, basically, I don't even think that the discourse is at the level where it needs to be if humanity is going to navigate our way through this. So I just want to thank you. You came on, you raised your own level of awareness, and you also modeled very good discourse. So Michael Levitt, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Leron. That was actually a pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care.
Big thanks to Professor Levitt for coming on the show and being super open-minded. Before you go, I want to tell you about a new website that just launched, AIsafety.com. What a domain name. That's $1 million domain name right there, AIsafety.com. Let's take a look. Here we are at AIsafety.com. Their big headline says, find your place in the AI safety ecosystem. What is my place in the AI safety ecosystem? Let me check. They have a page here called Field Map. This is a map of AI existential safety. We can head over here to a section called Video Vista. I think that's where you're going to find Doom Debates. Oh, there we go. Look at this. Doom Debates right here in Video Vista. Wow. That's so cool that we have an outpost here in the map of AI existential safety. But you can see there's so many other sections. There's Training Town, which isn't about training AI models. I think it's about training people like you to get up to speed and contribute to AI safety. So a very interesting map. I encourage you to check it out, scroll through, see if any of the organizations grab you. Going back to AIsafety.com, they've got communities. Look at all these in-person communities. I'm just scrolling through. They've got AI Safety Turkey, AI Safety Bulgaria, AI Alignment at UC Irvine. Apparently there's 194 communities that they've indexed here. Some of them are real world, some of them are online. Less Wrong is one of the online communities, obviously. There's the AI Alignment Slack, which is the largest real-time online community. There's the Pause AI community, the Rob Miles AI Safety community. I don't know if they've listed me here. There's a Doom Debates community. There's a pretty active Discord if you go to doomdebates.com and find the link for the Discord. I don't know if I've got representation on AIsafety.com/communities, but that's okay because there's over 100 others. So there's no shortage of AI safety communities. Seriously though, people are often randomly messaging me saying, hey, Leron, how do I get involved? This big question, how do I get involved? And my general answer is like, look, we all have to find ways to have these angles of attack and play to our strengths. And my answer is generally to point them to a few communities. So this site is doing it better than I ever could personally. So I do recommend checking it out. And you're going to find so many like-minded people and people who have similar interests and hopefully can give you some guidance how you can contribute to AI safety. There's another tab here on the site for jobs. Apparently there's 330 AI safety jobs, not too shabby. Okay, a bunch of these jobs are at DeepMind. I don't know if you should go work for an AI company, but at least these jobs are unobjectionable things like Senior Product Manager Agent Security. I mean, if you're going there and all you're trying to do is prevent the agent from escaping or preventing foreign governments from easily exfiltrating the agent's weights, that's pretty unobjectionable. So you might consider jobs like that. Another tab here is called Events and Training. So there's all these upcoming events and programs. Okay, interesting. There's the AI Safety Unconference, which is in Melbourne, Australia. There's Effective Altruism Connect 2025. There's an Explainable AI Mixer. It's pretty impressive they've managed to index all this because, to be honest, when they were working on this project, I was always skeptical because I'm like, yeah, another hub. Everybody wants to be the hub. Nobody ever goes and visits the hub. But honestly, this effort has gone way farther than I ever thought it could. First of all, they got the killer domain name, AIsafety.com. They got a really good clean site design, and they've been really diligent about keeping it up to date. That's why they pushed me over the threshold to be like, you know what? I do think this is the go-to resource. I think they've actually succeeded at doing this impossible thing of becoming the hub when everybody kind of tries and fails to be the hub and then there is no hub. I think this is actually the hub. I'm feeling good about this hub, AIsafety.com. And just to finish through going all the pages that are on their site, there's a page that's all about funding. Organizations that offer financial support. Man, I got to browse this. Let's see who's going to be the best funder for Doom Debates. They've got things like Coefficient Giving, formerly known as Open Philanthropy, Manafund, the Future of Life Institute. Shout out to Max Tegmark, recent guest and co-founder of FLI. It's 49 different funds that are listed here, and I'm sure it's only growing. They've got media channels, so there's 71 different media channels like Transformer and Less Wrong, the AI Alignment Forum. What about Doom Debates? Boom, Doom Debates is here too. That's a media channel as well. They've got a whole page here for advisors. It says, connecting with human experts can be invaluable. These advisors offer free guidance calls to help you most effectively contribute to AI safety. Man, so many resources. They weren't wrong about resources. There's another page about volunteer projects. It says these are initiatives seeking your volunteer help. These projects are focused on supporting and improving the AI safety field. Okay, I'm going down the rabbit hole here. I'm getting really excited about all these different resources here at AIsafety.com. This is not a paid promotion. I'm just excited because Doom Debates is trying to move the needle on AI safety. All these other people are trying to move the needle on AI safety, and it's pretty cool to see everybody kind of pull it together in a single website, which is surprisingly nice, surprisingly comprehensive. So well done, AIsafety.com. And who are these people, AIsafety.com? I don't even know. It says maintained by AI safety community builders, and there's like 3 small images. So maybe they're like semi-anonymous, but one of them did email me when the site went live asking me to check it out, and that person's legit. So you're in good hands going to AIsafety.com. That is it for today. If you haven't seen the Max Tegmark versus Dean Ball debate from last week, highly recommend checking it out because this is the kind of impact Doom Debates is looking to make. 2 people on opposing sides of the discourse who both have important roles to play, who are both in the room where important discussions happen, right here on Doom Debates, hashing it out, being respectful, and sticking to the actual disagreement without mudslinging. Just click the link in the show notes or go to the YouTube channel. It's one of the most recent debates, Max Tegmark versus Dean Ball. Should we ban super intelligent AI? Hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on Doom Debates.